Seattle, 2024. For a decade, in the forgotten neighborhoods tucked between the glittering high-rises and the gray waters of the Sound, children were vanishing. Their stories were filed away, their families dismissed, the dots left unconnected. The city, in its relentless push toward a brighter future, had built over its own dark secrets. But deep beneath the streets, in the city's forgotten underground, a civil engineer, tasked with mapping the old bones of Seattle, it would stumble upon a truth far more terrifying than crumbling infrastructure, a hidden route that would expose a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of power and unearth a tragedy that had been deliberately and systematically buried in the dark. Before I begin, thank you for watching. I'd love to know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It means a lot to know you're here, sharing these stories with me. We're in this together. Now, let me tell you the story. Lena Brooks's world was one of concrete, steel, and the quiet, predictable laws of physics. As a civil engineer for the City of Seattle's infrastructure department, she found a deep and abiding comfort in the logical, unemotional language of schematics and stress load calculations. At 34, her life was a carefully constructed blueprint of its own. A recent, amicable divorce had left her a single mother to her 10-year-old son, Noah, and her days were a meticulously balanced routine of work, school pickups, and the quiet and domestic rhythms of their small, tidy apartment. She was a woman who believed in rules, in data, and in the tangible, verifiable truth that lay beneath the surface of things. It was this belief that had brought her here, 60 feet below the bustling, historic streets of Pioneer Square, into the cold, damp silence of the city's forgotten underbelly. Her current assignment was a crucial, if unglamorous, part of Seattle's ambitious light rail expansion project. She was tasked with mapping the old, decommissioned utility tunnels that crisscrossed the city's foundations, a subterranean labyrinth of brick and iron that dated back to the turn of the 20th century. These tunnels were the city's ghosts, relics of a bygone era, and before the massive boring machines could carve their new paths, every inch of this forgotten world had to be accounted for. Her job was to ensure there were no surprises, no structural weaknesses, no hidden voids that could compromise the multi-billion-dollar project above. The air in the tunnel was thick and cold, carrying the smell of damp earth, old brick, and a faint, metallic tang of rust. The only sounds were the drip of condensing water from the arched ceiling and the low, electronic hum of the ground-penetrating radar unit she was pushing before her on a wheeled cart. The beam of her helmet lamp cut a sharp white cone through the oppressive darkness, illuminating walls slick with a century of moisture and a floor covered in a fine, undisturbed layer of dust. This was her office, a place of profound, almost monastic, quiet. It was just another job, another set of data points to be collected, another map to be updated. She was simply charting the forgotten bones of the city, never imagining that she was about to stumble upon its still beating and deeply malevolent heart. The anomaly appeared on her screen without fanfare. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible deviation from the expected readings. Lena was in a section of the tunnel that, according to the city's oldest and most reliable schematics, should have been a solid, continuous brick wall, the original retaining structure for the 1907 sewer overhaul. For hours, the ground-penetrating radar had shown just that, the screen a soothing, predictable display of dense, uniform mass. But now, a new and deeply unsettling image was taking shape. Behind the thick 3-foot brick wall, the radar was showing a series of voids. They were not the random, irregular shapes of natural geological formations or the slow, cancerous decay of structural collapse. They were clean, geometric, and clearly man-made, a series of rectangular chambers, each about 10 feet by 20 feet, that did not exist on any city map, on any schematic, in any historical record. They were ghosts in the machine, architectural impossibilities that her instruments were telling her were undeniably real. A cold, professional curiosity, tinged with the first faint prickle of unease, settled over her. She ran the scan again, recalibrating the unit, assuming a technical glitch. But the image returned, just as clear, just as undeniable. Newly carved chambers. The term newly was relative in a place this old, but the radar's density readings suggested the voids were geologically recent, carved within the last few decades, not the last century. It was then that she heard it. A faint, low-frequency humming sound, a rhythmic, vibrational thrum that seemed to be coming from the very wall she was scanning. She froze, pulling her headphones off, straining her ears in the damp, absolute silence. The humming was gone. She told herself it was acoustic interference, the ghost of a passing bus or the rumble of the city above, its sound waves traveling through the earth and the brick in strange, distorted ways. She had read the official reports from other engineers who had noted similar phenomena. It was a known, if unsettling, quirk of working in the deep underground. She put her headphones back on, her rational, engineering mind overriding the small, primal voice in the back of her head that was screaming that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The voids were a structural problem, a safety issue. She would file her report, and the system, the logical, predictable system she trusted, would take care of it. The response to Lena's report was not what she had expected. Following protocol, she had documented the unmapped voids with her usual, meticulous precision, flagging the section of the tunnel as a potential structural hazard that required immediate, on-site investigation before any further light rail planning could proceed. She had submitted the report through the department's official channels and had expected, at best, a slow, bureaucratic response, a series of forms and follow-up meetings. What she got was a swift and deeply chilling phone call. Her boss, a career bureaucrat named Henderson whose primary skill was the navigation of the treacherous currents of City Hall politics, summoned her to his office. His demeanor, usually one of placid, avuncular calm, was tense, his eyes darting nervously toward the closed door of his office. "Lena, about that report you filed this morning," he began, his voice a low, almost conspiratorial murmur, "the one about the Pioneer Square tunnel. I need you to retract it, delete it from the system." Lena stared at him, her professional composure momentarily shaken. "Delete it? Sir, with all due respect, those are unmapped, potentially unstable voids. If we don't investigate them, they could pose a catastrophic risk to the new light rail line. The mayor's office has been very clear on this," Henderson said, his voice dropping even lower, his gaze unwavering. He was no longer her friendly, supportive boss. He was a functionary delivering an order. There are to be no delays, no complications, and no unexpected expenses on the expansion project. All records and survey data related to that specific tunnel section are to be considered classified under the mayor's urban renewal plan. It's an eminent domain issue, a sensitive negotiation. We are not to interfere. Do you understand? The message was clear. This was not a suggestion. It was an order, wrapped in the impenetrable, unassailable jargon of a higher political power. She was being told to unsee what she had seen, to erase a truth that was inconvenient to the powerful men who ran the city. Shaken and confused, she returned to her desk and, with a few reluctant clicks of her mouse, deleted the report. That night, as she was tucking her son Noah into bed, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown, blocked number. The message was short, cryptic, and sent a jolt of pure, cold adrenaline through her. It read, "If you heard voices, you're not crazy. They move them on Thursdays." The anonymous text was a terrifying validation. The humming she had heard was real. The voids were not just an engineering problem, and she had just, at the command of her boss, become an unwitting accomplice in the conspiracy to keep them a secret. The name Marisol Vega was well known in the small, insular world of Seattle City Hall and its various municipal departments. She was an investigative reporter for an independent, online news outlet, a tenacious and often infuriating journalist who had a reputation for chasing the stories the city's larger or more established media outlets deemed too controversial, too unprofitable, or too insignificant. For the past 2 years, her primary, all-consuming obsession had been the quiet, unofficial epidemic of missing children from the city's lower-income and immigrant communities. Her crusade was not just professional. It was deeply, agonizingly personal. Her own niece, a bright, vibrant 9-year-old girl, had vanished from a playground 2 years ago. Her case met with a lackluster police investigation that had been quickly and quietly closed, the official explanation a vague, insulting suggestion of a custody dispute. Marisol knew this was a lie, and in her grief, she had discovered a pattern, a horrifying, invisible web of similar disappearances that no one, not the police, not the city, not the mainstream media, was willing to connect. Her apartment was not just a home. It was a cold case office, a war room. One entire wall was covered with the smiling, hopeful, and heartbreaking faces of the lost. Her niece's school picture was at the very center, a constant, silent, and demanding presence in her life. She believed, with a certainty that was both a burden and a fuel, that the key to the disappearances lay somewhere in the city's own, neglected infrastructure, in the forgotten, unmapped spaces where a crime so vast could be hidden. She had heard rumors, whispers from disgruntled city workers, about strange, off-the-books activities in the old, decommissioned tunnels beneath the city. When she learned of the upcoming city council briefing on the light rail expansion, a briefing at which the lead tunnel inspector would be present, she saw her chance. At the meeting, a dry, procedural affair, Marisol waited for the public comment period. She walked to the microphone, her presence immediately causing a ripple of tension among the council members on the dais. She didn't address them. She addressed the woman who had just given a calm, professional presentation on tunnel safety, Lena Brooks. "Miss Brooks," Marisol began, her voice ringing with a clear, confrontational authority. "My name is Marisol Vega. For the past 2 years, I have been investigating the disappearances of over 24 children from this city. I have reason to believe that the decommissioned tunnels your department is currently surveying are being used as part of an illegal network. Can you, under oath, tell this council and the public that your inspections have found no irregularities, no unmapped chambers, and no signs of recent, unauthorized activity in these tunnels?" The question was a direct, public, and deeply uncomfortable challenge. Lena, standing at the podium, was blindsided. She thought of the voids on her radar screen. She thought of her boss's chilling order. She thought of the anonymous, terrifying text message. And she did what she had been instructed to do. She lied. "Miss Vega," Lena replied, her voice a mask of cool, professional composure. "Our inspections have found the tunnels to be structurally consistent with all existing city schematics. There are no irregularities to report." Lena's public denial at the city council meeting was a lie that sat in her stomach like a stone. She had followed orders. She had protected her job, her career, her carefully constructed, stable life. But she had done so at the cost of her own integrity. And the image of Marisol Vega's face, a mixture of fiery conviction and profound, disappointed grief, haunted her. The anonymous text message, with its cryptic, terrifying warning, was a constant, buzzing presence in the back of her mind. They moved them on Thursdays. After a week of sleepless nights and a growing, gnawing sense of complicity, Lena made a choice. Her professional caution was finally, and completely, overridden by a more powerful, human instinct. She was a mother. She looked at her own son, Noah, sleeping peacefully in his bed, and she saw the faces of the children on the flyers that Marisol Vega sometimes posted in her neighborhood, the ghosts that the city had tried so hard to erase. She could no longer be a part of the silence. She found Marisol's contact information online and sent her a short, encrypted email. "You were right. I lied. We need to talk." Their decried. They met in a noisy, anonymous coffee shop far from the prying eyes of City Hall. The initial atmosphere was tense, a palpable wall of distrust between the two women. Marisol, the fiery, crusading journalist, saw Lena as a cog in the machine, a bureaucrat who had chosen to protect the system over the truth. Lena, the cautious, methodical engineer, saw Marisol as a reckless, emotional zealot who could compromise them both. But as they began to talk, the wall of distrust began to crumble. Lena, her voice a low, hushed whisper, laid out the evidence from her world. The ground-penetrating radar scans showing the impossible, unmapped chambers, the chilling, direct order from her boss to delete the report and classify the area, and the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle, the anonymous text message. In turn, Marisol opened her own heartbreaking file. She didn't just show Lena statistics. She showed her a life. She told her the story of her niece, of her favorite color, of the sound of her laugh. She walked Lena through the pattern of disappearances, the shared geography of the victims' neighborhoods, the identical dismissive excuses offered by the police in each case. She showed Lena her wall of the lost, not in person, but in a series of photographs on her phone that were just as powerful. In the sterile, impersonal light of the coffee shop, the two women, the engineer and the journalist, the woman of data and the woman of heart, realized they were holding two perfectly matched halves of the same terrible puzzle. Lena had the map of the physical, hidden world beneath the city. Marisol had the map of the human toll, of the lives that had been stolen in the world above. Their skills were different, their personalities were worlds apart, but their purpose was now the same. In that moment, an unlikely and deeply dangerous alliance was forged. The first descent was a journey into the city's dark, forgotten heart. Using Lena's detailed, and now officially erased, schematics, they identified a potential point of entry, a sealed, a long-forgotten service entrance to the tunnel system, located in the sub-basement of a condemned hotel on the edge of Pioneer Square. The hotel was a skeletal, boarded-up relic, a ghost of Seattle's past, and the perfect, anonymous cover for their own secret expedition. Under the cover of a rainy, moonless night, they broke in. The air inside the hotel was thick with the smell of decay, of wet plaster and rot. Lena, with her engineer's knowledge and a set of tools from her own garage, worked on the rusted, formidable lock of the service entrance. After 10 tense minutes, the lock gave way with a groan of protesting metal, revealing a small, dark opening and a set of steep iron rungs descending into the absolute blackness below. The air that wafted up from the tunnel was cold and ancient, the smell of damp earth and a century of silence. They were entering a world that had been sealed off from the sun, from human eyes, for decades. But as they descended, their powerful flashlights cutting sharp, nervous beams through the darkness, they quickly realized that the silence had been a lie. The signs of recent activity were undeniable and deeply chilling. The thick, undisturbed layer of dust that should have coated the floor was marred by a clear, wide path of fresh footprints, the prints of heavy work boots. Discarded food wrappers, modern and brightly colored, lay in the corners, a jarring, anachronistic intrusion in this ancient space. And then they saw the crates. They were large, wooden, and industrial, stamped with the familiar, innocuous logo of a city-contracted youth outreach program, a company that had recently been in the news for winning a major, multi-million-dollar contract from the mayor's office. Lena's scientific, detached mind was racing, trying to process the impossible logical disconnect. A city contractor, operating in a classified off-the-books tunnel? It made no sense. But Marisol, who had spent years investigating the city's labyrinthine network of contracts and non-profits, saw the connection immediately. It was a perfect, plausible, and utterly corrupt cover. They moved deeper into the tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the vast, cathedral-like silence, their flashlights dancing across the damp, curving brick walls. The main tunnel opened into a larger, cavernous junction, a place where several smaller, older tunnels converged. And it was here that they found it, a temporary holding area, a crude makeshift camp in the heart of the city's underworld. The space was littered with the heartbreaking debris of stolen childhood. There were empty juice boxes, discarded granola bar wrappers, and a small, pathetic pile of blankets in a corner. It was a place where people, small people, had been held, a way station on a journey to an unknown and terrible destination. Lena's mind, the mind of a mother, was reeling. She thought of her own son, Noah, of his own, brightly colored backpack, of the snacks she would pack for him each day. The abstract, professional nature of her investigation had just been shattered by the raw, emotional, and deeply personal reality of what she was seeing. And then Marisol found the smoking gun. Lying on the floor, half hidden under one of the dirty blankets, was a small, child's backpack, a popular brand with a cartoon character on the front. It was the kind of backpack she saw on dozens of kids every day. But this one was different. Attached to the zipper was a small, plastic, and professionally printed ID tag. It had a barcode, a number, and the name of a currently operating youth rehabilitation shelter, a non-profit that was a cornerstone of Mayor Easton's Seattle Safe Again campaign. The chairman of that non-profit's board, a fact that Marisol had uncovered weeks ago in her research, was the mayor's own younger brother. This was it. The undeniable, irrefutable link. The connection between the unmapped tunnels, the missing children, and the highest, most trusted levels of the city's government. It was a conspiracy that was not just hidden, it was being funded, sanctioned, and protected by the very people who had sworn to protect the city's most vulnerable. Lena, her hands shaking, pulled out the small, helmet-mounted camera she had brought with her, a piece of her standard inspection equipment, and began to record. Her voice a low, trembling, and deeply damning narration of everything they were seeing. They surfaced from the tunnel just before dawn, the first gray light of the morning feeling like a physical blow after hours in the absolute darkness. They were exhausted, filthy, and carrying a truth so heavy and so dangerous it felt like a physical weight. They retreated to Marisol's apartment, the war room, the one single place in the city they felt safe. The plan was simple. They could not go to the police. They could not go to the local media, which was too deeply enmeshed with the mayor's office. They had to get the evidence out, to a secure, independent source, before the forces they had just uncovered had a chance to react. Lena, her face pale and drawn in the glow of her laptop screen, connected her helmet camera and began the process of uploading the encrypted, high-definition footage to a secure cloud server she had created under a false name. The video was their only proof, their one, single, undeniable piece of evidence. The progress bar on the screen crawled slowly, each percentage point a small victory. She was at 80% when the screen flickered. A single blue error screen, the kind she had seen 100 times in her professional life, filled the display. And then, a new and deeply chilling message appeared. Its text a calm, corporate, and utterly terrifying font against the black background. System maintenance underway. All local files have been cleared to prepare for system update. We apologize for any inconvenience. Lena stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. She tried to reboot the laptop. She tried to access the local hard drive. Nothing. The machine was a brick. The footage from the camera, which had been temporarily stored on the laptop's local drive before the upload was complete, was gone. Remotely, surgically, and completely wiped. It was not a glitch. It was a counterattack. They were not just investigating a conspiracy. They were being actively hunted by it. They were not just being watched. Their own technology, her own trusted city-issued laptop, had just been turned into a weapon against them. The digital erasure of the evidence was just the first shot in a war that had now, officially, been declared. The invisible, powerful forces they had provoked began to push back, their methods a terrifying mixture of bureaucratic intimidation and psychological warfare. The walls, which had been slowly closing in on the conspiracy, were now, suddenly, closing in on them. The first casualty was Marisol's story. She had been working on a draft of her exposé, a carefully worded piece that laid out her theory without revealing her new and now erased evidence. She had shown it to her editor, a good, brave man who had always supported her work. The next morning, he called her, his voice a panicked, hushed whisper. He had just received a hand-delivered, legal-sized envelope. It was a cease and desist letter from a high-powered law firm that represented the mayor's office. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, a document filled with veiled threats of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for defamation, libel, and the spreading of malicious falsehoods that could irreparably harm the city's reputation. It was a declaration of legal war, a shot across the bow that was designed to silence not just this story, but any future story. Her editor, his small independent publication facing financial ruin, was forced to kill the piece. The next casualty was human, a city employee in the Public Works Department, a man who had been a secret, anonymous source for Marisol for years. a man who had provided her with the initial, off-the-record tips about the strange and off-the-books tunnel contracts, suddenly went silent. He stopped responding to her encrypted texts and her calls. A week later, his terrified wife filed a missing persons report. He had, she told the police, gone out for a drive and had simply never come home. The police, of course, treated it as a routine case, a man who had perhaps decided to walk away from his life. But Marisol knew. Her source had not walked away. He had been removed. The conspiracy, which had been an abstract, political, and professional battle, now became a deeply personal and terrifying war. The message came not as a legal threat or a veiled warning, but as a polite, cream-colored envelope in Lena's own mailbox. She opened it to find a thick, glossy brochure and a formal, embossed letter. It was from the Northwest Youth Leadership Foundation, the same nonprofit chaired by the mayor's brother, the same nonprofit whose ID tag they had found on the backpack in the tunnel. The letter was an effusive, glowing offer. Her 10-year-old son, Noah, it said, had been specially selected from among thousands of students in the city to receive a prestigious, full-ride scholarship to their exclusive and very expensive summer leadership program. Lena's hands trembled as she read the words. The program was a 2-week overnight camp held at a remote, secluded facility in the mountains. The letter spoke of building character, of fostering future leaders, of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a gifted young man. It was couched in the language of privilege, of opportunity, of a benevolent, civic-minded generosity. But it was not an offer. It was a threat. It was a message, delivered with a chilling, surgical precision. A message that was designed to communicate one simple and terrifying thing. We know who you are. We know where you live. And we know what and who you value most in this world. The abstract, faceless conspiracy now had a face, and it was a face that was staring directly at her son. Her fight was no longer just about the truth, about justice, about the forgotten, nameless children on Marisol's wall. It was now a fight for the life of her own child. The professional had been forced to become a warrior, and now, the warrior was being forced to become a mother bear, cornered, terrified, and ready to do whatever it took to protect her cub. The scholarship offer was the final, clarifying blow. It was an act of such profound, arrogant evil that it burned away the last remnants of Lena's caution. They were cornered, they were silenced, and now, they were being directly threatened. Going back to the police was not an option. Their evidence had been erased. Their allies were disappearing. Their credibility had been systematically dismantled. They could not fight the system from within. They could not fight it from the side. They had to go over it. They had to create a fire so big, so bright, and so undeniably real that it could not be contained, could not be explained away, could not be ignored. They met in a small, anonymous motel room on the outskirts of the city, a place of transient lives and no questions asked. The air was thick with a new, desperate urgency. Their plan, born of that desperation, was as simple as it was dangerous. They had to get new evidence, irrefutable evidence. They had to capture the entire, monstrous operation on film. They moved them on Thursdays, Lena whispered, the words of the anonymous text now a mantra in her mind. The next Thursday is in 3 days. That's our one and only shot. Lena, the engineer, the woman of systems and schematics, took charge of the logistics. Her mind, once focused on structural integrity and load-bearing capacities, was now focused on a different kind of engineering, the engineering of an ambush. Using her last bit of savings and a final desperate contribution from Marisol's dwindling source fund, they acquired the tools they would need. They bought a set of miniature, motion-activated, wireless cameras, the kind used for wildlife photography, their batteries long-lasting, their casings waterproof and durable. They bought a high-powered, encrypted, mobile hotspot to create their own untraceable network. The plan was a high-stakes gamble, a single, all-or-nothing roll of the dice. They would have to return to the tunnels, to the very heart of the danger, one last time. They would have to plant the cameras at the key junction they had discovered, the place directly beneath the city-owned juvenile outreach center. the place where the human cargo was being transferred, and they would have to do it without being detected, without leaving a single, solitary trace. It was a desperate, almost suicidal plan, but it was the only one they had left. The descent, this time, was different. It was not a journey of discovery. It was a military incursion. They moved with a new, grim, and silent purpose. Their backpacks filled not with investigative tools, but with the instruments of a desperate, high-stakes gamble. The night was cold, the rain a fine, misting drizzle that seemed to seep into their bones. The condemned hotel was a dark, brooding silhouette against the bruised night sky. Lena, her engineer's mind now a tactical computer, guided them through the darkness with a quiet, confident efficiency. She had memorized the schematics, the twists and turns of the subterranean labyrinth. Marisol, her reporter's instincts now honed into a sharp, feral alertness, watched their backs, her eyes constantly scanning the shadows, her ears attuned to the slightest, unnatural sound. They reached the junction, the crude, temporary holding area they had discovered before. It was clean, almost sterile. The blankets, the backpack, the discarded food wrappers, it was all gone. The space had been sanitized, erased, a sign that the operators of this dark network were not just ruthless, they were meticulous. They began their work, their movements a silent, practiced ballet of desperation. Lena, using her knowledge of sightlines and structural features, identified the perfect hidden locations for the cameras. She placed one high in a dark, recessed alcove in the brickwork, its small black lens invisible in the shadows. She placed another inside a rusted, hollowed-out ventilation pipe, its view perfectly framed on the main transfer area. She placed a third, the most important one, on a high ledge that had a clear, direct view of the large metal doors that she now knew led up into the sub-basement of the outreach center above. They connected the cameras to the small, powerful, and encrypted mobile hotspot, a device they tucked away in a waterproof casing. They tested the feed on a small, handheld tablet. The images were clear, sharp, and horrifyingly real. They had created their own secret surveillance network, a web of hidden eyes that would, they prayed, finally capture a truth that had been hidden in the dark for far too long. Their work done, they retreated, a silent, nerve-wracking journey back through the darkness, leaving behind their digital sentinels to stand watch. The motel room was a makeshift command center, a tense, claustrophobic bubble of anxiety. The curtains were drawn, the lights were off, the only illumination coming from the cold, blue-white glow of Marisol's secure, encrypted laptop. The live feeds from their hidden cameras were displayed on the screen in a grid of 3, silent, black and white images. For hours, they watched, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and terror. The images were static, empty, a testament to the deep, profound silence of the city's underworld. And then, just after 2 a.m., the silence was broken. The feed from the third camera, the one aimed at the large metal doors, flickered. A line of light appeared at the base of the doors, and then they began to groan open. The sound, even on the laptop's small speakers, a low, ominous protest of rusted metal. The image that unfolded was more damning, more horrifying, and more professionally incriminating than they could have ever imagined. 2 men, dressed in the dark blue, official-looking uniforms of a city-contracted maintenance company, emerged. They were wearing city-issued ID badges on lanyards around their necks. They were not the shadowy, faceless thugs of their imagination. They were men who looked like they belonged. Men who had the official, sanctioned authority to be there. They were followed by a small, shuffling line of children. There were 6 of them, their ages ranging from about 8 to 12. They were not crying. They were not fighting. They were eerily silent, their faces pale and drawn, their movements slow and lethargic, as if they had been drugged. They were led through the tunnel like a small, sad, and completely compliant herd of animals. The contractors led the children to a large, unmarked, white van that had been driven into the main junction of the tunnel, a place that Lena knew, from her schematics, was directly beneath the secure, underground municipal garage of the Juvenile Outreach Center. The conspiracy was not just using the tunnels, it was using the city's own protected infrastructure, its vehicles, its personnel. It was a monstrous, parasitic organism that was living, breathing, and operating within the very heart of the city's official body. It was a betrayal so profound, so complete, that it was almost impossible to comprehend. And they now had it all, in clear, sharp, and undeniable high definition. The unmasking was a swift and brutal act of journalistic warfare. Marisol, her hands shaking but her resolve absolute, did not go to the local news. She did not go to the Seattle police. She went national. She had a contact, a producer at a major, East Coast-based news network, a woman with a reputation for breaking stories that brought down powerful men. She sent the encrypted, high-definition footage in a single large file. But she didn't just send the video. She sent everything. She sent Lena's entire comprehensive file. The original ground-penetrating radar scans, the timeline of the 24 disappearances, the financial links she had uncovered between the mayor's office and his brother's nonprofit. She sent the story of the cover-up, of the threats, of the missing city employee. She was not just giving them a story. She was handing them a fully formed, evidence-backed indictment. The response was immediate. Within hours, the story was the lead item on the network's website. By the next morning, it was the lead story on every national news broadcast. The footage, the silent, black and white, and utterly horrifying video of uniformed contractors leading dazed children through a dark, subterranean tunnel, was played on a loop, a grainy, nightmarish vision that was now burned into the nation's collective consciousness. The story exploded. It was a firestorm, a scandal of such staggering, unbelievable proportions that it engulfed the entire city of Seattle. The narrative was no longer just about missing children. It was about a deep, systemic, and horrifyingly cynical conspiracy that reached the very highest levels of the city's government. The mayor's carefully crafted image, his Seattle Safe Again campaign, his reputation as a competent, compassionate leader, all of it was incinerated in the white-hot glare of the national spotlight. The city government was paralyzed, its officials either scrambling for cover or issuing panicked, unconvincing denials. The wall of silence had not just been cracked, it had been blown apart. The federal response was as swift and as overwhelming as the media firestorm had been. Within 48 hours of the story breaking, a fleet of black, unmarked SUVs, their windows tinted, descended upon Seattle. Federal agents, led by the Department of Homeland Security, effectively seized control of the investigation. The local police, now a symbol of incompetence and potential corruption, were sidelined. The raids were coordinated, simultaneous, and brutal. Agents stormed the headquarters of the Juvenile Outreach Center, the offices of the city contracted maintenance company, and, most publicly, the mayor's own office at City Hall. They were not asking questions. They were seizing computers, filing cabinets, and people. The tunnels, the dark, secret heart of the conspiracy, were officially sealed off. No longer a municipal concern, but a federal crime scene. Teams of forensic investigators, clad in hazmat suits, descended into the underworld that Lena and Marisol had so recently navigated in secret. The arrests came quickly. The contractors from the video were identified and taken into custody. The mayor's brother was arrested at his lavish, multi-million-dollar home. And finally, the architect of the silence himself, Mayor Harold Easton, was arrested, led from his office in handcuffs, his face a pale, shocked mask of disbelief. The man who had been so certain of his own untouchable power now just another suspect in a federal investigation. The trail of wire transfers, of illegal campaign contributions funneled through the nonprofit, of secret, off-the-books payments, was a clear, undeniable path that led directly to him. The city's savior was a fraud, a monster who had built his career on the stolen lives of the city's most vulnerable children. A year later, the city of Seattle was still healing, still grappling with the profound, systemic betrayal that had been exposed. The trials were ongoing, the full, horrifying scope of the illegal network still being untangled by federal investigators. But the city itself had begun to change. Lena Brooks had quit her job with the city's infrastructure department. The system she had once trusted, the world of rules and procedures she had once found so comforting, was a world she could no longer be a part of. She now worked alongside Marisol at her newly founded and nationally recognized non-profit organization, a group they had called, with a quiet, powerful sense of irony, Below the Surface. It was an organization dedicated to investigating the cold, neglected missing person cases that systems and cities so often chose to forget. The story concludes not in a courtroom or an office, but back where it began, in the quiet, subterranean world beneath the city. The tunnels, once a place of darkness and terror, had been reclaimed. They were now clean, brightly lit, and heavily monitored, a part of the city's official infrastructure once again. In the final scene, Lena walks through one of the main tunnels, the same one where she and Marisol had made their first terrifying descent. She is not alone. Her son, Noah, now 11, walks beside her, his hand in hers, his face full of a child's wide-eyed wonder at the strange, beautiful, and now safe underground world. Lena stops at a section of the wall, the same section where her radar had first detected the impossible, hidden voids. She places her hand on the cold, rough brick, a silent communion with the history and the horror that it had once concealed. The ghosts were still here, but they were no longer silent. Their story had been told, and as she looks down at her son, at his safe, untroubled, and hopeful face, she whispers, the words a quiet, final promise to him, to herself, and to the children who had been lost in the darkness, never again in the dark.